And so, again, the requirement in law for us and all of our plans is to, on an operating basis, to have net positive cash flow.
This isn't rhetorical, it's a hard question. What's going to be different with this rail system as opposed to Amtrak, which has never made it?
It's a fair and a good question. It's a fundamentally different system, and in a number of respects, and one of them being its speed, because it then fills a different niche in the transportation market, and what has been demonstrated around the world and in the U.S. with the closest thing that we have to high-speed rail, which is the Amtrak Acela service on the Northeast Corridor, is that this service, because of its efficiency, the total time travel, the productivity, all of those factors allow the system to pay for itself and to be attractive. That's true of high-speed rail around the world on an operating basis, and even on the Amtrak system, that Northeast Corridor, which is top speeds at about 150 miles an hour, we're going to have top speeds of 220. 220? 220. The Amtrak service is now capturing over 80% of the travel market between Washington and New York, and is not only paying for itself, but significantly subsidizing the rest of the Amtrak system. And so we have a very high degree of confidence based on the combination of our modeling and experience around the world that we'll achieve the same sort of results.
I've had a little trouble over the years figuring this thing out. I know it's required to stop by the statute every so many miles, isn't it, for passengers?
No, by statute, there are some specific requirements. There's a limit on the total number of stations, and there are specific stations identified where we have to have stations. How the system actually operates will depend on decisions made at that time. So there will be, for instance, potentially express trains between Los Angeles and San Francisco. There will be trains that make stops at different locations at different times of day based on market demand, things like that.
That has a big impact on, though. Will 220 miles be your average that we're going to hit every way? I mean, if you're going to stop often, how can you maintain that? You have to have top speed at 300 if you're going to maintain it for the
right.
whole distance, aren't you?
Yeah, no, 220 is the maximum speed.
But that won't never be your average speed
no.
destination to destination on the course of it. So it'll be faster than regular train, but 220s, that's a peak.
Correct.
I got it.
Right,
okay.
But to give back to your question on Amtrak, just as a point of comparison, the San Joaquins, which run up and down the Central Valley, those trains average about 50 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. We'll be at about, on average, through the Central Valley, I'll have to double check, make sure I'm not saying right, but about 3 times that speed.
Just a couple of Madam Chair. I don't want to dominate everything here, but eminent domain's a big deal with me. Are you having any problems there with, potential sites that they don't want to sell and you're having to exercise eminent domain? Has that become a big deal or a little deal? Or?
It has not. So far, we have not had to proceed through with eminent domain on a single property. Our goal is to minimize that as much as possible, come to agreement, but certainly it is a potential, and we expect we will have to in some cases. In many cases, typically for anyone through the eminent domain process, the issue is over the valuation, and that's what's then decided through the court process. But we do have eminent domain authority. We will use it where we have to, but our absolute goal is to avoid it wherever possible and reach agreement, and we've been able to do that with all of the agreements we've signed to date.
Just 2 more, but I'll return to the chair. I might have some more later, but did I hear you say a bit ago that you're now going to be electrifying the rail? It hasn't been able to be electrified to this point. Now that's going to happen. Is that correct?
What I was speaking about was on the peninsula, the Caltrain system, which is an existing diesel-powered system, is being electrified and incorporated into our system.
But is the main system, let's say down the valley, is that going to be?
That will be... First, we're building it sequentially. We have to provide the underlying infrastructure, then the track, and then the electrification. Yes, it will all be, the entire system will be electrified.
In the Valley track, though, that you're not set up for that yet, though?
Not yet, no.
And how about the locomotives to pull these trains? Are they available, that kind of a locomotive?
Yes, they are. There are about a dozen manufacturers around the world who build these kind of trains. We've been doing outreach with them. We've begun early parts of the procurement process to determine who will ultimately be the supplier of the trains.
Just the last one. What's an overall figure, say, to build the whole thing? I mean, I've heard 90 billion, and I've heard more than that. What are we talking about? The
cost estimate, which we're required to provide for the entire system and do it on a projected forward basis, a year of expenditure basis, which is unusual for programs, is 68 billion.
68?
68. That's in inflated dollars. In uninflated dollars, it's about 55. And we are working to bring those costs down, but that's what's in our business plan.
I thank you.
Sure.
Chair, I'll return the chair.
Thank you. Just a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to public comment. When you, Mr. Thompson, talked about developing a dashboard, I heard Mr. Morales say that, in fact, that is underway, or what is happening with that?
We held a discussion on this issue of what dashboard indicators would be most useful to you on February 24th. I'd say we reached agreement on several of them and several that we're still discussing, but I have no doubt that if we sit together, we can put together the kind of indicators that you need, not they and not someone in between, but you need to tell almost at a glance how are things going.
All right. Well, we would like to request that you report back with, we hope, an agreement on this issue. I think it would really be helpful to track the metrics that in the way you described it. I think it would be extremely helpful. Let's see. And finance, you talked about there are vacancies. I'm wondering, Mr. Thompson, if that has affected your operations per se, and vacancies on the peer review group.
Well, if you lose 4 of your 8 members, you lose half of your expertise and laborers of one kind or the other. We certainly would be strengthened to have those positions filled.
How long have they been vacant?
Some as long as, well, one has never been filled, and others have been vacant for 2 or 3 years, one for 1 year.
Do you have any comment on that? I mean, you said we'll do it as soon as possible, but maybe we need a little bit more, you know, I agree with Mr. Thompson. I'm not sure how that, one was never filled?
One has never been filled, that's right.
What's the requirement on the, is there a requirement?
Yes, there is a legislative requirement which I can furnish you as to who appoints what, but as it stands now, the finance director, the controller, the treasurer, and the Caltrans, or California State Transportation Agency, each have 1 slot to appoint.
I see. And are those the slots that aren't filled?
Yes, those are the ones that are not filled.
Well, I'd like you to report back to us what the plans are to fill those. And if there are applicants, I mean, if that's just a designee, is that a designee?
Well, each individual has to have a certain type of expertise.
Sure, we have
obviously.
it, but
sure. So I know in some cases, like in Finance's case in particular, we're actively reviewing potential candidates, and so I can speak to that one in particular. And in the cases of the other individuals. For controllers and treasurer's office and the transportation agency, I know that the agency has reached out to the other entities to discuss the vacancies, but I can certainly report back.
I would really appreciate that.
May I add something to that? Yes. Because what she said is quite fair. Several of the slots, 2 in particular, have a very specific requirement for high-speed rail expertise in Europe and Asia, et cetera. And those are very rare people to find. It would be very helpful if some flexibility could be shown. For example, The challenge in the next 6 years is essentially to build a highway project. It isn't really a high-speed rail project. It's more of a highway project. And so someone with that expertise of how is this done, what are the issues, would be just as useful as somebody who knows how to build high-speed rail projects. Possibly in the future that will change, but some flexibility would also be useful.
I think one of the things that would be helpful, I mean, perhaps, I assume this was set up by statute, as I recall?
Yes.
A part of the, all right, that kind of, that may need to be tweaked in the statute, which we could do, seems to me, in the trailer bill. You know, reflecting some of the comments that he's made, maybe a 4-year term or a 5-year term that has certain expertise at this point and others. I mean, why don't you come back with some sort of work with staff to see if we can get this peer review up and running, because it's more minds are better than less, right? Just in general. Mr. Morales, did you speak about, are you concerned about any of the legal challenges presenting delays primarily because of the courts?
Again, we've worked through what was probably the most troubling case initially, which had to do with the challenge to the bonds, and that's been resolved in our favor. Obviously, any case has the potential to create delay. Frankly, some of the plaintiffs have filed suits with the stated expression of trying to create delay. So we are working through all of those, but what I can say is that the suits, at least directly, have not so far, in fact, imposed delay on the program, and we're constantly looking at ways to mitigate any impacts from those. And right now, we don't see any of the pending cases inflicting delay on us.
Are they all in the Superior Court of Sacramento?
The CEQA cases are in Superior Court here in Sacramento. Yes, there is another case in the appeals court, and we have an issue of preemption, federal preemption case that is essentially being pulled into the state Supreme Court. We're being brought in through another case.
All right. Senator Nielsen, I think we'll listen to public comment if there's anyone here. Absolutely.
Questions, and that'll be all. The greenhouse gas, do you have any projections of what your reductions will be? The cap and trade money is going to be invested in this. From build out, what will be the reductions that you can anticipate?
Sure. Yes, Senator, we do. Early, again, before 2020, through a combination of things we're doing, we estimate between 278 to 674,000 metric tons. As we get up operational, and that's obviously where we'll produce the biggest reductions, ultimately we are looking at 18 million tons.
18 million?
18 million tons being reduced, and that's as we see, part of where that comes from is the mode shift of people out of either cars and especially out of airplanes onto the train, because the train's electric, non-polluting. The carbon footprint is minimal, and certainly compared to an airplane.
I'm not being argumentative, but can we really anticipate that many Californians will want to get out of the car? I mean, won't that take generations if we're going to get to that ever? I don't know.
That's, we're seeing a lot of people don't realize we have in this state, Senator Wolk certainly knows the Capitol Corridor and how important that is. It's the third busiest line in the country. We have 3 of the 5 busiest Amtrak lines.
More money.
Yes. 3 of the 5 busiest Amtrak lines in the country. And again, that's with service that struggles to compete with the car in some cases, because we're running on freight tracks currently and have to compete for that. We do expect to see that change. It will increase over time, and it also is important that it's tied to connecting transit and other services on the ends so that people can make a complete trip. And so that's why we are working closely with local and regional partners to improve local transportation that connects with us.
Last question then. In your business planning, and you don't have to recite them here, I could just get a get them on paper or something, but do you have then an anticipated ridership and annual revenue?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if you'd like, I'd be happy to.
Well, go ahead then.
Or we can
Sure.
come in and talk. But yes, we have detailed forecasts for ridership, for revenues, for operations and maintenance costs, and how all of those things tie together, projecting out at different stages of the program and over time.
Okay. We'll just request that separate. You don't
Certainly.
have to go there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to public comment, I just wanted to ask one more question and ask Mr. Simbal, when at the LAO, when you mentioned, and so did Mr. Thompson, you know, it's hard to get if you're going to conduct good oversight, you need to have a good report, and you need, you know, rather than just have a mountain of information that you simply can't get that those who oversee can't get their arms around. Would it be, I would like to suggest that before the May revise, that the LAO, the staff, and Mr. Morales, and any suggestions you have, Mr. Thompson, get together and talk about this issue of oversight, the many reports, whether it would make sense to consolidate in some way and make it more usable, because it is a mountain of a project.
Yes.
So I'd like to suggest, if you're amenable, that we do that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Raise your hand if you have public comment. All right. Come forward. There are two mics, one on each side. All right. Welcome. Identify yourself for the record. Welcome.
Chair and Senator Nelson, Lance Christensen from Reason Foundation. We have almost 50 years of expertise in the area of transportation and specifically of public-private partnerships, and have been watching the high-speed rail for some time. We've done multiple due diligence reports and have gone through a lot of the plans. The amount of research that you say is out there. It's very hard to navigate. And if this project made sense, I think we would be able to, with the staff and others that are here, quibble on some of the specifics. But as we've gone through, as I've listened to this conversation today, I think we have 5 questions, and I'll just run through those quickly. How are we protecting the property rights of those, both the condemned and then those that are adjacent to the line? This has serious implications in some of the higher density areas that we're in or anticipating going. Who's going to actually pay for this, as Senator Nielsen has pointed out, and others? And is the greenhouse gas money and others going to go on in perpetuity? And is the state going to subsidize the maintenance of this in operation at some point in time? Who's actually riding this train? 39, 44 million people a year at some point in time, where are they going? And adding on to that is, how does that actually reduce sprawl? If we're encouraging people to use this train, where are these 39 to 44 million people or more going every year that's going to reduce sprawl, especially as we have places along the line in the Central Valley? And then fourth, really the serious question here is, if we're using cap and trade money, AB 32 has a 2020 target date. It's not built out till 2022, at least for the first part. Where are we getting these greenhouse gas reductions? Concrete and steel just alone are massive. Removing the carbon sinks along the Central Valley and the trees, those are all massive impacts to greenhouse gas reductions. These are questions I think the legislature should really think hard about and ask these questions, especially for dedicating money, which may go to other projects that would reduce greenhouse gases. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your thoughtful questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Sarah Phlox from the California Labor Federation. We've been supporters of the high-speed rail project since Prop 1A, and we have participated in numerous legislative and budget hearings on the high-speed rail project under the 2 former executive directors and the former board. And I would like to just say to this committee that we are very, very pleased with the work of Mr. Morales and his department and the board. The relationship, I think, between the legislature and the former executive directors of the High-Speed Rail Authority was contentious at times. But from those discussions, there did come revisions to the business plan and real improvements to the work of the High-Speed Rail Authority. So we're very pleased to see this committee working with Mr. Morales and his staff to make sure that this project is timely and on time. And we are happy to participate in this process and very happy with the work and the progress that we've seen so far. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Further public comment? All right, I believe that concludes the business of the committee, the subcommittee this afternoon. I want to thank everyone for coming and for your forthcoming suggestions and reports. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.